Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the wildly unlikely survival story of an ancient Roman text that, believe it or not, profoundly shaped modern science and our appreciation of nature. Very few pieces of writing actually managed to bridge that vast gap between ancient history and modern science, but the poem we're looking at today, it did exactly that. We're talking about a crazy story filled with fragile manuscripts, dedicated monks, visionary printers, and some of the absolute greatest minds of the 20th and 21st centuries. Let's kick things off with a bit of a mystery. If I ask you right now to find the common denominator between the world's most famous theoretical physicist and our most beloved broadcaster and naturalist, well, you might look to modern biology, right? Or maybe quantum mechanics. But the answer actually lies with an ancient Roman named Lucretius. So why on earth would these two distinctly modern titans share an absolute obsession with a 2,000-year-old text? The connection is pretty amazing. Back in a 2014 interview, David Attenborough was asked to name his all-time favorite books. He narrowed down a literal lifetime of reading to just 6 titles. 6! And right alongside Darwin's Origin of Species, Attenborough revealed that a rare 510-year-old printing of Lucretius's poem De Rerum Natura, which translates to On the Nature of Things, is one of his most precious possessions. Attenborough, a man who has dedicated his entire life to observing the natural world, finds this profound wisdom in a 2,000-year-old text. Specifically, he cherishes his edition published in Venice way back in 1515. But wait, it gets even better, because decades before that, Albert Einstein himself was completely captivated by this exact same poem. In fact, he was so obsessed that he penned an enthusiastic foreword for a German translation of the book. Einstein wrote that for anyone not completely wrapped up in the spirit of our time, anyone who kind of feels like a spectator to the intellectual attitudes of their contemporaries, Lucretius's poem will, and this is his exact phrase, work its magic. Einstein saw Lucretius as this incredible, independent thinker equipped with lively senses and scientific curiosity, a guy trying to imagine the world without any of the modern scientific scaffolding that we totally take for granted today. That 1924 German edition cements a massive physical link between ancient philosophy and modern physics. The translation itself was done by a classical philologist named Hermann Diels, and Diels was so dedicated to Epicurean philosophy and this specific text that Einstein said his verses read so naturally, you actually forget it's even a translation. Think about that. Einstein's foreword in that very volume proves just how deeply relevant ancient philosophical intuition remained, even at the exact moment the theory of relativity was completely reshaping our modern understanding of the universe. So, what was it about this text that blew their minds? It all boils down to a concept called atomism. This is the worldview that Lucretius passionately championed, acting as a faithful disciple of earlier Greek thinkers like Democritus and Epicurus. Atomism is the theory that literally everything in the universe is based on the regular motion of immutable atoms. Instead of blaming the workings of the world on the whims of mythological gods, Lucretius was basically arguing for a universe governed by mechanical physics. He asserted that atoms have only geometric mechanical qualities, and that all sensual qualities, like warmth, coldness, color, odor, taste, and even the phenomena of life and the soul itself, are simply the result of the movements of these incredibly light atoms. Einstein actually noticed a really brilliant, almost sneaky duality in Lucretius's writing. Lucretius explicitly stated that his primary objective was to liberate humanity from the slavish fear induced by religion and superstition, fears he felt were being exploited by priests. But Einstein observed that despite this stated goal, Lucretius's actual method, his real driving force, was to teach the geometric mechanical physics of the universe. Because his Roman readers were practically oriented, he couldn't just hand them a dry, boring physics textbook. He had to weave this radical, atomistic worldview into a grand mission of human liberation. Section 2. Surviving the Dark Ages. The Fragile Thread of Knowledge. You really have to wonder, how on earth did a text this radical, one that completely bypassed religion for atomic physics, actually survive the decay of the Roman Empire to eventually reach modern titans? Well, as classical philologist Hermann Diels detailed, the poem's survival literally hung by a thread. After the triumph of Christian doctrine, it was saved by just 3 main manuscript families. First, there's the Oblongus, a 9th century Carolingian copy written in beautiful minuscule letters, once held in the Mainz Library. Second, the Quadratus, another 9th century manuscript from the monastery of St. Bertin. And finally, the Poggian family, stemming from a miraculous rediscovery by a guy named Poggio Bracciolini, who hunted down a copy in a distant monastery in 1414. If it weren't for those frail parchment copies made by monks who, let's be honest, probably completely disagreed with the text's radical physics, Lucretius's masterpiece would have been lost forever. When you map out this timeline, it is just an incredible historical journey. In the 1st century BC, Lucretius creates De Rerum Natura. Then, for hundreds of years, it basically sits in obscurity until the 9th century when those critical Carolingian copies are made in monasteries. It fades into the background yet again until the Renaissance, when in 1414, Poggio Bracciolini rediscovers the text, bringing it back to the intellectual circles of Italy. Fast forward a century to 1515. It hits the printing press, and eventually in 1924 it lands right on Albert Einstein's desk in the form of Hermann Diehl's German translation. Now, we really need to pause on that year, 1515. This is the specific edition David Attenborough treasures. Aldus Manutius wasn't just any printer in Venice. As Attenborough points out, this guy essentially invented the equivalent of the portable paperback, a real game changer. Before this, books were massive, heavy things, often literally chained to monastic libraries. By printing classic authors in small portable books using a wonderfully elegant italic script, Manutius put revolutionary ideas like Lucretius's atomism directly into the hands of the public. He ensured they would spread like wildfire and survive outside the brain of a single isolated scholar. The sheer unlikeliness of this chain of survival, from neglected papyrus to monastic parchment to the very first paperbacks, is staggering, and it allowed the poem to reach modern scientific minds. As Einstein marvels here, it wasn't just the fact that Lucretius somehow guessed at atoms, it was his firm confidence in the intelligibility and the causal connectedness of the universe. Einstein was just blown away that a man living 2 millennia ago, without a scrap of modern data, possessed such a deep intuitive grasp that the universe was a connected, mechanical whole that could actually be understood through reason. Which brings us to a truly thrilling thought to wrap up this explainer. We've seen how the forgotten verses of an ancient Roman, barely scraped through the Dark Ages, managed to echo through time, perfectly harmonizing with modern scientific discoveries. It really begs the question, if a 2,000-year-old poem can hold such profound insight for the father of relativity and our greatest living naturalist, what other world-changing ideas are currently gathering dust in the margins of history, just waiting to be rediscovered by us today?